So in this section, our goal is going to be simply to make sure that we can share it all. By the end of this chapter, we'll be able to host a session, join a session. People who are in the session that have HoloLenses on will have red clouds floating above their head. And people who are in the session that are using the immersive device, the Acer device, they will have blue clouds somewhere in the world. So, like I said, we're going to be sharing with UNet this year. And the way it's going to work is the first HoloLens that will start the session, and then it will look around for a spatial anchor, and it will make a spatial anchor that will be used as a common point of reference for all the other devices in the scene. Now, when HoloLens 2 joins, HoloLens 2 doesn't know where that position is. So HoloLens 1 has to send the information it used to find that position in the real world to HoloLens 2. And then HoloLens 2 has to go find it. Now, when we first start this up, when you're the second HoloLens joining, your mentor is probably going to say, go walk around and look at this and look at that. And that's because we're trying to get your HoloLens to get the same perspective as the first HoloLens so that it can have the best chance of finding the same tracking points. And once we have a shared coordinate system, it's really easy to have clouds floating over people's heads, to position holograms in the same spot in the world. And then for somebody using the Acer device, we aren't actually doing real-world tracking on the Acer device. We're not going to try to figure out where it is in space. So we'll just take the origin of our scene, and we'll make that the shared coordinate on the Acer device. All right, so let's get this wired up. Find island. Select it, right-click, and then delete. Buy island. And then select Vroom. And follow the same procedure. Right-click and select delete. And say goodbye to the room. And now in the project panel on the bottom, select App Prefabs under Assets. And since we're sharing, we're not using Island anymore, we're using Usland. So go ahead and drag Usland in the hierarchy. All right, so now we have Usland in the hierarchy. We need to add all the stuff for sharing. So again, from the App Prefabs folder, we have 4 things to drag in. UNet Sharing Stage, which has all of the scripts used to create and join sessions in Unity. UNet Anchor Root, which is the object we will be actually putting the shared world coordinate on, and it has the script to manage that. UI Container, which has the UI, the buttons we need to start and join sessions. And finally, Debug Panel button, because, well, lots of developers in here, we know things go wrong sometimes. If you see the little wrench icon, you can tap it, and you can see the debug output coming from the app. Anything you debug.log from Unity shows up there, and then there's some high-level app stats, too. So now in the hierarchy, let's walk through a script. So let's select UNet Anchor Root, and then bring your attention to the other side of the screen, the right side of the screen, for those of you who know left from right. I'm glad I was right about that. And then find UNet Anchor Manager in the inspector and double-click that grayed out text. Who knew that grayed out text was useful for clicking? All right, so let's walk through here. This is how we do the anchor exporting and importing. So first we'll start with the creating and exporting. So on line 210, we have create anchor. And there's a little bit of management there for like reusing the old anchor if we already have one and stuff like that. But the important bit starts around line 230. And here we set up our world anchor transfer batch. And if there's any API you need to remember, if you're trying to figure out how to share anchors between multiple devices or, say, different applications, the world anchor transfer batch is what you need. And what we need to put in the world anchor transfer batch is a world anchor. And so we ask the object for its world anchor. And if it doesn't have one, we add one. And then we debug log that we're exporting, so we could see that in the debug panel if we needed to. We add the world anchor to our transfer batch, and then we tell the world anchor transfer batch to export. What will happen here is write buffer will be called several times with data that you have to put into some sort of stream. That is an exercise left to the reader. The code is here to read if you wanted to. And then when all of the data has been written, then export complete will be called, and we will know that we have an anchor that we could export should somebody want it. Now on the import side, starting on 183, we call import async. And anchor data is the data that was created by export async. All the stuff that got put in gradually over time into the stream that I said that you could figure out how to do later. That is what's in anchor data. And when the import is done, import complete gets called. And an import complete, we make sure that it actually succeeded. And if it did, then we grab the first anchor, which should be the only anchor because that's how this code has been written. And we check to see if we have an anchor on our object currently. And if we do, we need to destroy it because we're going to put a new anchor on. And then we do the lock object API, and we make sure that we are actually tracking, which you can find out from the isLocated property on the anchor. An anchor on tracking change will be called when we have located the anchor, unless it is already located. And then we'll just undo the callback. We'll see that when we go to line 334, which this is the callback. And we say, hey, did we locate it? Great, we've established our anchor, and we can send that data to other people. And then we save our anchor locally so that we don't have to download it again later, because these can be between 5 and 20 megabytes of data. We don't want to download that all the time if we can avoid it. And then we unsubscribe from the callback because we don't actually need to hear about tracking change for this anchor anymore. Well, that's how it's done. We don't necessarily need anchors, though. Once we've got anchors, we actually need to visualize people in the world. It's important to think about what your experience is when you come up with how people show up in the world. For instance, in this deploy, if you're in the HoloLens, you'll have a red cloud going over your head. But if you're on the immersive device, you'll have a blue cloud sort of floating somewhere in the world you don't know where. It's important to keep these things separated so you know, like, I shouldn't expect to see the blue cloud over anybody's head, but the red cloud I should. Gaze is also important to think about. Especially if you're doing a remote presence scenario where somebody is sitting here in a conference room and somebody else is working remotely, but you're all looking at the same hologram, having some sort of indication of where the remote user is looking can be very useful, especially when people start using words like, look at that, or pick up this, right? If you don't know what they're looking at, you'll be in trouble. But if you do know what they're looking at, well, it's just like they're there. And I think that's what we're going for, all right? All right, so let's save our scenes. Now for this deploy, if you remember from last year with Holograms 240, getting like the sharing set up, sometimes it works really well, and sometimes it's a little bumpy at first to get it going. So we want to be very, very methodical with what we do here. So your mentors are going to set up the session for you. We want 3 people on HoloLenses and 3 people in immersive devices, and then you can trade after you've seen it from one device or the other. So all we're going to see here is just people with clouds. If you're in the immersive device, you're just going to be sort of stuck outside looking in. You're not going to actually show up on the island like you may have seen in previous videos. So go ahead and deploy and enjoy.